Okay, so I've started the recording. Hello and welcome everyone. I'll start presenting. Okay, so let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to the second installation of our Energy 101 series. This is part 2 where we will be focusing on renewables and alternatives. A special thank you to the WOG Academics Committee whose collective collaboration made this presentation possible. Let's start off with a brief background and recap of what we learned about last time regarding energy and its impact on the environment. So why do we care? On a global scale, we can see that historically our electricity usage has increased drastically to be on average triple what we used to consume 60 years ago. This is no doubt concerning because we have to meet this increasing demand in an industry that's not really capable of rapid change, especially in infrastructure. Concurrently, our emissions are increasing exponentially and consistently country by country. In general, this drastic increase in emissions stems from the onset of the Industrial Revolution and our dependence on fossil fuels. Eventually, global temperatures will exceed the livable temperature range of humans unless we substantially decrease our emissions now. While policy is critical for implementing the necessary changes, some politicians are confused about climate change or maybe refuse to understand. Highlighted here are major climate policies and ways in which we can deter emissions. This is by no means comprehensive, but form the baseline for energy policy. So the Paris Climate Agreement, for the first time ever, brings all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effects, with enhanced support to assist developing countries to do so. As such, it charts a new course in the global climate effort. So it was a very big deal, especially in terms of international relations, when Trump announced his intentions to pull the US out of it in 2017. It's widely believed that without full participation from the US and China, which are the world's top 2 carbon emitters, this agreement would be ineffective. The Clean Power Plan was an Obama administration policy aimed at combating anthropogenic climate change, that is human-induced global warming, by regulating greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector. Trump has since moved to repeal the crux of Obama's climate policy, citing that the benefits were significantly less than proposed. But the difference has to do with a metric called the social cost of carbon. This is an estimate in dollars of how much damage is caused over the long run by a ton of CO2 emissions in a given year. It monetizes the cost of climate change from impacts like reduced agricultural productivity, increased flood damage, or worsened health and mortality. In general, clean energy incentives target the marginal cost of abatement and efficiency to attract corporations. The general consensus in the academics committee is that cap and trade and carbon taxes are hypothetically the most efficient methods of reducing corporations' climate impact. This will be discussed further in part 3. Okay, so I thought a fun way to start the conversation would be to gauge knowledge through some surveys. Okay, so please bear with me because I'm not super familiar with hosting Zoom, but I'm gonna launch the survey. Okay. And I'll give you guys like a minute to do so. All right, I'm gonna end the poll early since everyone responded. Okay, so I'm gonna share the results, which are very interesting. In that most of you said 5 to 10% of the world use it, like the percentage is for renewable energy. Um, this is very good. Yeah, the number of years of fossil fuel is 70 years. And which type of renewable energy produces the most energy? Okay, so yeah, hydropower is very good. Solar is actually the least, interesting enough, but we'll discuss that promptly. Okay. So back to the presentation. So for the first question, what's the percentage of renewable energy usage in the world? So in terms of global renewable energy usage, the answer is around 10.6% as of 2017. So if you were in the 5 to 10 range, then I think you were right. So notice that the most talked about forms are in this modern renewables box at around 2%. The vast majority of global energy usage still comes from fossil fuels at 79.7%. So how many years left do we have at our current rate of energy consumption? At our current rate of consumption, we run out of fossil fuels in different stages. Technically, the answer is 70 years, with coal lasting the longest, but you can give yourself partial credit, I guess, if you hit any of these three. So oil would be consumed the fastest with 30 years left, gas with 40 years, and coal with 70 years. The survey is based on proved reserves, which we discussed last time. So there's a potential that like a massive undiscovered reserve could tweak these numbers, but unlikely for now. So on a global scale, which type of renewable energy produces the most energy? So hydropower is the type of renewable energy that produces the most out of renewable sources. This isn't a big surprise given the historical usage of hydropower, like for example, the Hoover Dam. However, starting from the 2000s, so around here-ish, we can see countries are taking advantage of solar and wind's high potential of growth and implementation. That being said, let's cover the basics of renewable energy. As we can see from the pipeline graph, most renewable energy is used for electricity generation, and there's not much penetration into the other sectors. Renewable energy also is considered much cleaner because it significantly decreases the wasted energy released in the form of greenhouse gas emissions. But on a global scale, renewable energy integration has been steadily increasing alongside electricity generation. This tells us that as we are ramping up electricity generation to meet global energy demands, the proportion of renewable energy meeting this demand is increasing. This is due to a combination of policy and innovation that recognizes that our past fossil fuel consumption is unsustainable. And we're reaching a point where our fossil fuel dependency is plateauing by 2050. So let's start off with solar energy. This diagram features a photovoltaic cell, which make up the solar panels you see on top of buildings. PV cells take in energy from the sun radiated in the form of light. The PV cells, electrons are excited by the light, and the flow of electrons make up the direct current, or DC. An inverter converts the electricity from DC to AC, or alternating current, which is what is used to power your house. So any extra electricity that you don't use may be used by the grid, and some utility companies may give you a discount on your utility bill for the extra electricity. Wind energy. So fun fact, last week Trump said that wind turbines are killing all the birds. In actuality, more birds are killed by cats than wind turbines. Wind energy is produced when the wind passes over the blades and turns them. The blades turn a shaft within the nacelle, which is the box over here at the top of the turbine. The shaft then turns a generator, thereby converting the kinetic energy of the wind into electricity. The transformer converts the electricity to the right voltage for the local network, and the subsequent electricity is exported to the electric grid. As mentioned earlier, hydropower is the largest contributor to renewable energy generation. How hydropower works is it utilizes the potential energy and kinetic flow of water from a reservoir where water is stored. The dam raises the river level and creates a height difference, forcing the falling water from the reservoir to turn the turbine inside the dam. This turbine turns the generator and produces electrical energy to be transported by transmission lines to the consumer. So in terms of other renewables, we have geothermal, which utilizes heat derived within the subsurface of the earth. Water and or steam carry the geothermal energy to the earth's surface. Depending on its characteristics, geothermal energy can be used for heating and cooling purposes or be harnessed to generate clean energy. We also have the ocean, where marine and hydrokinetic technologies harness the movement of the ocean's waves, tides, and currents, which are converted into electricity. I've been knocked over by so many waves and would love it if instead I could charge my laptop. Hydrogen is a useful energy source and fuel because it has a high energy content per unit of weight, which is why it's used as a rocket fuel and in fuel cells to produce electricity on some spacecrafts. Biomass energy is energy generated or produced by living or once living organisms. The most common biomass materials used for energy are plants such as corn and soy. The energy from these organisms can be burned to create heat or convert into electricity, as we'll see later on with ethanol. Storage. Storage is a huge issue we need to resolve before there's a wide-scale adoption of renewable energy resources. With renewables, while they offer an unlimited supply, storing that energy to fuel our lifestyles requires significant coordination. As we can see from this graph of a typical day with a solar battery system, the orange hump here is solar energy production, where the peak is at high noon since the sun is directly overhead. However, in our pre-COVID lifestyles are illustrated by this blue and aqua mountain range, where we have peaks in energy usage in our homes at 8 a.m. when we're getting ready for work, and 8 p.m. after we get home at 5, and all use energy all night long. So without storage, we're only able to utilize this aqua region of the orange hump because it overlaps with when we're at home actively using energy. However, with better storage, we can take this unused orange portion and distribute to when we need it, so in the blue regions. Effectively, storage is a limiting factor in our renewable energy integration. The main energy storage technologies currently are as follows. So batteries offer a range of electrochemical storage solutions, including advanced chemistry batteries, flow batteries, and capacitors. Thermal involves capturing heat and cold to create energy on demand or offset energy needs. Mechanical storage refers to other innovative technologies to harness kinetic or gravitational energy to store electricity. Hydrogen targets excess electricity generation by converting it into hydrogen for storage via electrolysis. Pumped hydropower creates large-scale reservoirs of energy with water. Around 95% of energy storage uses pumped hydropower, but there are only a certain number of available pumped water storage locations. Battery storage also has considerable limitations and costs based on technical characteristics. In short, unless storage is significantly improved, renewable energy integration just isn't cost effective nor reliable enough. On a global scale, we can see a disparity between renewable sources as primary energy and electricity production from renewables. This is to reinforce a common trend that we've been seeing, that renewable energy is mainly used as an input for electricity generation. To address the primary energy map, the highest integration has been from Northern Europe, specifically Scandinavia, where hydropower and geothermal are the staples of their energy industry. Next, we'll talk about alternatives to fossil fuels that aren't renewable and alternative fuels. So nuclear energy leverages the energy that holds together the nucleus of an atom to provide a clean energy source. Since we're not burning fuel, there are no greenhouse gas emissions released into the air. The energy of interest has to be released from the atom to be usable. So there are two ways to free energy from inside the atom. There's nuclear fusion, which combines atoms to make a new atom. Energy from the sun is actually produced by this process, where hydrogen atoms are combined to make helium with a byproduct of energy, which is released as heat and light to us. The other method is nuclear fission, where we split atoms into two smaller atoms and the energy release escapes as heat and radiation. Nuclear power plants use the heat released from nuclear fission to make electricity from uranium. So why do we use uranium specifically? Uranium ore is a mineral and it's a common element found in the Earth's crust. The mining and extraction process is typically very similar to that of coal, but when uranium ore is found in groundwater, it's mined via in situ leach, where uranium is dissolved and pumped out. The largest producers of uranium are Canada, Kazakhstan, and Australia. Once we have our uranium, we can discuss how electricity is generated in a nuclear power plant. First, we have within the containment building, the nuclear reactor where nuclear fission occurs. The resulting heat acts as an input into the steam generator here to turn water into steam. When the steam turns, huge turbines that drive generators to make electricity. The steam is then condensed back into water and cooled down in a cooling tower over here. And this water can then be used repeatedly. So sometimes people think that what's coming out of the cooling tower is like greenhouse gases or pollution or whatever, but it's actually just steam. Please also note that nuclear energy is usually considered to be non-renewable, even though nuclear energy itself is a renewable energy source. It's the uranium, which is a non-renewable resource. Although uranium is found in rocks all over the world, nuclear power plants usually use a very rare type of uranium, which is U-235. So I'm sure that you're all aware that one of the biggest barriers for nuclear energy implementation is the safety stigma after Chernobyl and Fukushima. However, in most cases, if you go through the timeline of these disasters that outline minute by minute what happened, you'll discover that the issue was poor safety regulation and employee negligence, which is why I have Homer Simpson here. If you ask me why I got into energy, my official stance is Wharton Energy, but really it was The Simpsons. As mentioned in part 1 of our series, the transportation sector is a major consumer of fossil fuels, and it's the #1 source of carbon emissions in the US. Fossil fuels are consumed directly by motor vehicles burning gasoline, diesel fuel in internal combustion engines, and aircrafts burning jet fuel. Fossil fuels are also consumed indirectly by consuming electric power for urban mass transit. Our reliance on transportation reveals a huge opportunity to decrease emissions by fundamentally changing a single sector. One way of doing so is through electric vehicles, which we covered in part 1 of our series. Very briefly though, an electric vehicle reduces fossil fuel demand by converting over 50% of the electrical energy from the grid to power at the wheels, whereas its gas powered counterpart only manages to convert about 17% to 21% of the energy stored in gasoline. Moving on to the new stuff. Yeah, so moving on to the new stuff, we have ethanol and biodiesel. Ethanol fuel is most often used as a motor fuel, mainly as a biofuel additive for gasoline. It's commonly made from biomass such as corn or sugarcane. The most common way of producing ethanol is via fermentation. The basic steps for large-scale production are microbial fermentation of sugars through yeast, distillation, and dehydration. Why do we want ethanol? It's using up all our corn and sugar, and now we won't have kettle corn. Well, ethanol is attractive to us because it's a renewable, domestically produced transportation fuel, which from an American perspective would decrease our oil imports. Ethanol also lowers the following three toxic emissions: carbon monoxide, exhaust VOC emissions, and carbon dioxide, as well as GHGs by a significant percentage. Globally, the top three ethanol producers are the US with corn ethanol, Brazil with sugarcane ethanol, and the EU, specifically Germany, with biodiesel. In fact, the US accounts for 62.2% of global production, while Brazil has 25%. So the pressing nature of climate change, while daunting, has also inspired some really cool innovation. On the left here is one of Dominion Energy's electric school buses. These buses will replace traditional diesel ones, and it leverages new vehicle-to-grid technology. Since all the buses are electric, they can be used as portable batteries. When they're not in use, they can be tapped as an energy resource. If energy needs are high or if renewable resources are intermittent, the batteries can provide stability to the grid. Additionally, during a power outage or emergency, the batteries could serve as mobile power stations. This innovation promotes cleaner air with zero emissions, increased safety for the children riding them, and lower costs and maintenance for the school district. As for this cow on the right, a team of researchers from Argentina were determined to repurpose their methane emissions. Cows and other livestock produce up to 25% of methane emissions, and methane is an issue when it comes to greenhouse gases. Therefore, these researchers put plastic backpacks on the cow's back ends and then put tubes into the biggest part of their digestive tracts in order to extract as much methane as possible. Researchers say that they found one cow can produce enough to run a car or a fridge for 24 hours. So that concludes this presentation. Thank you to everyone who listened and contributed to this event. If there are any questions, I can take them now, but I'm also putting a link in the chat since I noticed from part one that you guys had some really great, insightful questions, but I'm by no means an energy expert. So any question that's uploaded onto this doc from now until midnight will get an in-depth response within 24 hours. So just check back to the doc if you submitted a question. But for the time being, does anyone have any questions?
Actually, I do have one question. I don't know if you know this, but with the storage barrier, do you think that one of the biggest barriers is more policy oriented for better storage for renewables, or is it a technological barrier that we're facing right now, or kind of a mixture of both?
I would say it would be more of a mixture of both and definitely less policy. I would say it's mainly the technology. I think it's just not meeting the targeted metric for effectiveness and reliability. So I would say definitely a few more strides in technology would lead to more implementation policy-wise. But I imagine a mixture of both since I'm not an expert on the subject, but probably a mixture. Anybody else?
I guess I have a quick question. Well, first of all, thanks for the awesome presentation and all the hard work. And my question, I guess, is how do you see the like grid being able to keep up with like different evolutions of renewable technologies? Like we can like put solar panels on our buildings, but like, is the grid able to handle this? And like, what innovations need to be made at the grid level in order to like kind of update it for the 21st century and for the growth of renewables?
So I will just say that the grid is definitely not able to handle a lot of the new like renewable energy innovations that are going on. I think it's mainly though from like a strategic planning standpoint that they're not able to accurately model how much they're expected to generate from renewable energy. I would say from professional experience, that a lot of the modeling is so dependent on weather, which is just not really that well understood, that they're not able to model accurately how much they should expect. So it's that uncertainty that's making it difficult to integrate it with the grid. Because if you have like a natural gas plant and you know what the inputs were, you're very likely to know how much output you're going to get, versus if you leave a solar panel or if you leave like a wind turbine out and you don't really know like maybe the effects of a hurricane, like how is that going to affect you as an energy company? It's just much harder to gauge.
Thanks.
I have a question. Where do you see the most, like, what do you think is the most promising renewable technology that could replace fossil fuels?
I think hydropower definitely has the infrastructure, but it's very old. And one thing also to mention is that a lot of hydropower, especially in the US, isn't actually emissionless. It has a lot of like operating emissions versus I always like to point out there's this small case in Norway where Norwegian hydropower facilities are actually emissionless, but it's because they're small enough. So I feel like hydropower has a lot of implementation already, and that would drive most of the portion, but I really hope that solar is more effective. I feel like that would be really great if solar was just much more effective because of how non-obtrusive it is. Because if you, with like wind turbines and wind energy generation, usually it's very like noisy and people complain about like a polluted skyline with having to see the infrastructure. But I feel like with solar panels, there's just so much potential with like all the roof space that we have. Like it doesn't need to necessarily like clear out more like agriculture, more usable land. We can just put it on top of our rooftops. So my hope is solar. I think it's mostly hydropower though.
That's an interesting perspective.
Thank you to Jeffrey, who says that ERCOT has been having issues with forecasted transmission constraints. Maybe worth looking into. I will. Thank you. Okay, so my Google Docs is freaking out. So I'm just gonna send my email. If you have questions that want like in-depth answers, then just go to that email.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think